Whether it was witchery, some modern science, or a demon let loose from hell, I am unable to decide. Williams Bell, from an authenticated history of the Bell Witch.
Who's there?
From 1817 to 1821, an entity calling itself Kate tormented the Bell family of West Tennessee. There is still no widely accepted explanation for this haunting. Coming summer 2024, on the new hit audio drama Afflicted, the Bell Witch returns to haunt a family in 1960s Tennessee, but only if we raise enough money to pay our cast and crew a living wage. Help bring this haunting to life and snag exclusive rewards like limited edition supporter t-shirts, producer credits, and more at afflictedaudio.com/support. But do it quickly. Some perks are limited only to early supporters.
Good evening.
Hi, welcome to Staring into the Abyss. I'm your host, Richard Gerlach, currently drowning in tombs of Stephen King novels and trying to decide where I could splice Mickey Mouse footage into some Stephen King movies. And with me, as always, is Matt Brandenburg.
I mean, one thing we could say is he did kind of throw in the Green Goblin into one of his movies, so he's already kind of just doing his thing.
You know what? What's Up, Doc is all over The Shining. So just put that in there. Put that in there. And,
well, that's actually an interesting point of discussion there, because we're talking about somebody who, when we talk about King, we're talking about somebody who puts song lyrics into his work, just like as he wants, and then lets other people figure out the details behind it. We're talking about somebody who based an entire 7-book series on a poem that he himself did not write. And, so he's, I wouldn't necessarily, and directly reference that poem, like lyrics from the poem, so on and so forth. Which, when you look at it, did he do that poem a favor?
Maybe.
Do more people know about that poem now than
this is true?
The voice you're hearing, which has yet to be introduced, is Daniel Barnett, author of the Nightmareland Chronicles.
Sorry, I got excited.
No, it's all good.
It's fine.
It is a good point, and I feel like you bringing up that fact of like, how many people have read it, say that poem before and then after. There was something else you just bringing it up made me think of, and of course this won't help because I can't remember what it's in reference to and what it's from, but there's another thing it's very similar to that where it's like this doesn't help at all. Never mind, that was just random. But
like Stephen King, the guy puts a goddamn niche into the last book of the Dark Tower.
Yeah.
He rocks and rolls, man. He does what he wants when it comes to intellectual property. He's like, all right, the Wolfman, right in there. The Mummy, oh yeah, do you want to know which mummy I'm referring to? This one. It looks exactly like the mummy from this, from that. Oh, Dracula? Yeah, it's this guy's Dracula.
That being said, Stephen King does have the legal team to back him when it comes to a lot of this stuff, and the resources to make sure he gets that stuff approved.
But it's funny, did he always? Because, you think about it, I think
so.
That's an interesting thought.
I would say post Shining Stephen King, yes. Pre-Shadow King now.
Well, then you look at Salem's Lot, and he's quoting the Emperor of Ice Cream directly right in the text.
That is true.
So, and then you get into like, is it? I mean, it's just an interesting discussion to have. Like he's somebody who kind of never let intellectual property hold back his vision for a thing. There's very much like an artistic melding of whatever,
Yeah.
Copyright law gets weird when you get to that stuff because you're allowed to use certain things if it's transformative to the thing that you're using.
Yep.
When it comes to like a song lyric or something like that, if it's argued that you're turning it into like another form entirely, that's like
That's
an
what the whole Ed
evolution.
Sheeran lawsuit was about recently.
Which one?
Ed Sheeran was getting sued by the Luther Vandross estate.
Oh yeah.
So
Well, and this is where it gets interesting too, because on one hand, I don't know anything about that case at all. But on the other hand, Ed Sheeran is the reason The Shape of You exists, so fuck that guy.
For our audience listeners who aren't in the know, there's been a big kerfuffle in the horror community involving IP and copyright after somebody posted a bootleg novelization of Halloween 5, and it rubbed some people the wrong way. I think it's an interesting discussion to be had. I do think that a lot of people don't understand copyright, and a lot of people don't understand the legalities when it comes to a lot of these things. And most everybody was talking out of their ass, and it was very entertaining to watch it go down.
I mean, like, it was an exceedingly stupid thing to write a novelization of a very mediocre movie that came out an infinite amount of years ago and publish it and try to make money off of it. Like, there's only one way that's going to end. And I say that with somebody with like love for the whole Halloween franchise, like, or for at least most of the Halloween franchise.
Yeah, fair.
Like, it's like this could have just been like some weird passion project that he printed off like 5 copies of and shared with his friends and his family. Like, look at this fun little thing that I did. Isn't it dumb?
Yeah.
And it could have just been a fun little thing that he did that was dumb. But instead, it became a very public thing that he did that was dumb. And then it's just, I don't, it's just.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's one of those things. It's like that. There's a story for Hunter S. Thompson where he would rewrite word for word Great Gatsby over and over so he could get the cadence and all that stuff. He never sold the frickin' book and said it was his. He never like printed it out. It's like, that's fine if you and again, the whole conversation, the whole kerfuffle was stupid, and I'm not going to throw any whatever, but just like that idea of like, hey, I'm going to use Halloween 5 as a test case for myself. I'm going to see what I thought worked and what I thought didn't work, and then I'm going to delete the document file.
The real question, why Halloween 5?
Yeah.
I mean, it
Out of all the Halloween movies, why 5?
Well, a point in his favor is he didn't come after John Carpenter there. Because John Carpenter had nothing to do with 5 anymore.
Yeah.
But I do think John Carpenter actually gets residuals when things happen, which is good for him. That's one case where, like, a corporate entity didn't just completely like hog all financial gain from intellectual property by like exploiting a starving artist before they became popular.
Right.
Successful. Like the Chucky guy. I know we just talked about the Chucky guy a moment ago, but
yeah,
like, that guy gets no money anytime anybody makes anything Chucky, and he came up with Chucky. And the reason he gets no money is because of like copyright stuff, because he got screwed on something along the way.
It's also part of the reason. That's part of the reason why Image Comics exists.
Yeah.
So like, Image, this will be our last copyright thing, so we can get on the podcast going, because our podcast isn't about copyright. As fascinating as copyright is, it's about the longevity of Stephen King. But
yeah. Well, if you
guys, it's the longevity of copyright, but Image Comics. So, like in the early '90s, a lot of comic creators were tired of not having creators' rights. So, like any character that a writer came up with for Marvel or for DC, that writer did not get any creative freedom with that character or ownership of that character. That character became owned by DC or owned by Marvel. And that's part of the contracts. So Image kind of came out to be like, hey, listen, fuck that. Creators' rights. You create a character with us, you own that character, you own that IP, that's yours, and we're just going to distribute the comic. And like that was part of how Image kind of did their business back in the 90s. Which I think was a good way to go about the business, but
oh, and quick talk here, we're like what 10 minutes into this call or whatever. That's a perfect little time to have that's a perfect amount of time to have like a little what's happening in the world discussion. When you guys post this episode, you could easily just say 10 minutes for copyright stuff and skip past that for the whatever stuff.
There you go. Well, it's funny by the time this airs, people. Yeah, no, go on.
Yeah, use it as a little tag. Give people. I mean, cut what I'm saying now if you want to, but use it as a little tag. Like this is a hot button issue we got into for 10 minutes, and then
Yeah. Well, and probably by then, it'll be the next big, I don't know, whatever it will be, and people will be like, "Oh yeah, remember that?"
Like, yeah, that guy Daniel said some fucking crazy shit on our podcast. Some really nutty stuff. You should probably tune in to hear his wild point of views.
Yeah. Like, hot take time.
I'm sure by then this IP stuff is old news, and some person who's left the platform will come back with a new Suck Puppet account and harass more people. Or there'll be some other genre drama that's happening about. I can never keep up with half this shit anyway. Yeah. Like there's always too much going on.
It's like the writers of this TV season are just recycling. It's like, I need something new. I've seen this all before. Let's do something different.
It's like the South Park episode when they reveal how Family Guy puts their jokes together.
Yeah.
Manatees.
Yep.
That guy Daniel said the sex scene shouldn't be cut from it. You better tune in to this week's episode.
Find out how sexy the sex scene was.
Talk about that sex scene. He's talking about full bush, man. Full bush.
Well,
well, here it is.
No.
It's happening.
Let's not go there.
Oh my gosh, that's perfect.
That's a good time for us to pivot into the media that we've consumed over this last week.
There you go. Good job.
So I have yet to see Fast 10. I know you have, Matt.
I have.
My ticket for Fast 10 is tomorrow. But last night, I did see a movie that had been out for a very long time, but I had never seen. And that's Primal Fear.
Yes.
With Richard Gere and Ed Norton.
Hell yeah. I got a dusty copy of that on like DVD somewhere. Like
I've never seen it before. I've always known the ending. I've always known it's like this great thriller twist ending. And I already knew what the twist was going into the movie. But like that ending is like top 5 like movie endings of all time. Like fuck, that hits like that just hits the gut so good.
Yeah, it was it's a solid one.
He just looks at him, he's like, there was no Aaron counselor. And it's just like you see the guy's world fall apart around him, and it's like a complete destruction of the main character that's just like perfect.
Yeah.
They don't make him like that anymore. Like I want like
a gritty little hard-boiled. Yeah.
Like I don't know. I miss those kinds of movies. I feel like we don't get those movies anymore.
No,
Well, you'll definitely not get it from Fast X.
No, yeah, you get those kinds of movies now in in this current day and age, you get those kinds of stories as like limited series on certain streaming platforms.
Yeah.
Where you get like, like smaller scale, heavy character work. I mean, they I won't say they've gone away, but they just come in like different forms,
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I do agree, but I miss the form being like a movie.
I agree. Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Just have a gritty character study of a movie, and like I'm sold. Like I'll happily watch it. But that being said, I did love Primal Fear, and I thought it was a great movie, and I should have watched it a long time ago. I also finally saw Dungeons and Dragons last week.
Oh, so good.
Which, that movie is just so much fun.
Yes.
It's not the best movie in the world, but it's a blast.
Yeah. It's like a good, fun, silly. I love that it's like a fun, silly fantasy movie. It's so tricky now, and maybe there are some out that I just don't know that recently came out, but like after Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones and even Wheel of Time, people went really gritty with it, and Dungeons and Dragons movies like, oh, let's just be really silly and goofy this whole time, but also have crazy fantasy elements in there, and it's like it's kind of nice to see that side of it.
What I love about it is like the story itself is a pretty serious like story, like the campaign, like the campaign setup, if you want to call it that. But like the actual characters in the movie, the main characters, feel like how people play D&D, where it's just like, oh, we'll just do the most ridiculous thing we can think of doing.
Yeah,
the whole Jonathan thing felt right out of a game. Like,
yeah.
Or like it's just a fun, it captures the fun aspect of playing D&D.
Yes. And like the not thinking you have a plan and then just not going with that plan.
Yeah. It was cute. It was a cute movie.
Yeah, it's a fun movie. It's harmless. I'd watch that again over most of the newest phase of Marvel movies. That's a shots fired. Pew pew pew.
It's no fucking Puss in Boots, but it's,
I know that new one, man.
Puss in Boots. Puss in Boots is his own thing.
Yeah, no, I'm just playing. I mean,
that newest Puss in Boots movie, that was something special.
Yeah, no, it really was. It rocked me. It rocked me. Like I've thought about it every day for months.
Have you seen it, Matt?
No, it looks really sweet.
It's really good. It's really, really good.
It is genuinely really sweet. It's also really funny, but more than that, it goes really fucking hard.
Yeah, the animation style looked really rad, so I was like, I need to see this.
The villain is legit terrifying, and awesome all at the same time.
And the movie actually has real stakes when it comes to Puss in Boots' character as well.
Yeah.
And it captures anxiety attacks super well too.
Oh my god, that scene is so powerful. Yeah, just watch it, man. You'll love it.
I'm on board. It's
really good.
Yeah.
I'll also try to be quick. I've also been watching the show From, which is on MGM Plus.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Because there's so many streaming services now. Anyway, From, I'd recommend getting a free trial of MGM Plus, binging it, and then deciding if you want to continue with the service or not. But From is worth watching. I hear season 2, they kind of dropped the ball. I'm not there yet. But the concept is there's this town. And if you find yourself in this town, you've entered a town that you can never leave.
Okay.
No matter what road you take, it brings you right back to the entrance.
Cool.
And all the people who enter this town, they all enter it from different spots in the country. So there's no one spot that takes you in the town. Just you're chosen to kind of be in this town, essentially.
Sweet.
And when night falls, these people who are pale white come out of the forest and brutalize any human they come across.
I'm liking this so far.
And it follows a group of people who have been living in this town for like a few months. They found a way to survive, but they found these weird talismans that if they hang by the door, it protects their house. And the pale people cannot get inside unless an entrance is opened for them. But if all the entrances are sealed and the talisman is put in place, the house is protected.
Nice.
So people have found a way to keep safe. And the show opens with a little girl praying before she goes to bed. And an elderly woman appears outside her window, pretending to be her grandmother. She opens the window and she is brutalized by this creature. And her mother's also brutalized. And that's the opening of the show.
Dang.
And it follows as new people have come to the town and tensions in the town are beginning to kind of rise among the people living there. And it is a really good horror series.
So what do they do during the day?
Some people try to figure out what the fuck this town is.
Okay.
One guy is kind of like the sheriff, and he kind of tries to keep people in mind and kind of resolve any conflicts that are happening. One person was a cook in the real world, and there's a diner in the town. So she operates the diner kitchen to like cook meals for everybody living there and stuff.
Okay.
There's one group of people who are kind of more like anarchists, and they don't want to live in the town. They have their own little house they live in separate, and they kind of do their own thing where they are. And each person's kind of up to something different.
I love it. Even like getting sent to this random place, people are still like, oh, I guess we need to get jobs.
I mean, you gotta occupy your time somehow.
Just some random dude. I'll work in this random store. It's cool.
So, but
and then sit there and complain. That does sound pretty cool, though.
Yeah, it's surprisingly a really good horror series in a world where we don't have that many good horror TV shows.
Yeah,
it's a refreshing to come across a high concept show that hopefully knows what it's doing and isn't Yellow Jackets.
Nice.
Yellow Jackets is a mess of a show. It really is.
It's so funny because everyone seems to love it. I don't have whatever it's on, but
Dan and I watched the first season of Yellow Jackets together.
My favorite part of the first Yellow Jacket season, other than them not even managing to make it to the cold opening in a whole season, is when they find like a 15-year-old plane in the middle of the woods, and they just like turn the key in the engine and it works.
That makes sense.
The plane thing definitely got me with that show because like at the time I had just finished like an extensive conversation with a good buddy of mine who like understands how things work in the world and also, you know, like mechanically speaking, and had just done a bunch of research because like a key part of a book that I wrote involved a plane that had been left alone for years being like how you would get how that would be made to work again.
Mm-hmm.
And so then to, you know, be watching kind of like something on TV that just kind of disregards everything in regard like just kind of wantonly disregards everything.
Yeah.
It's first off, I mean, it's like it's more complicated than a car.
Yeah.
But even if it's a car, there's something to be said there for the fact that batteries will die.
Yeah.
Like very fast too. Yeah. Like if you just leave your car in your parking in your garage and don't start it for a month, you're going to need to restart the battery. So first off, they didn't even re-jump a battery, which is egregious. Second of, you get it way down the line when it comes to batteries and stuff, and a re-jump isn't necessarily always going to work either, because the way that the connections work.
Oh yeah.
But third, and like probably even arguably most significant for a plane, is that jet fuel loses its potency when it's exposed to oxygen. So you have to use what's in the tank in a certain amount of time. So like what would have been in that plane's tank would have just been like gruel. It just you know, like you're like you're trying to like start a plane on porridge. Like, it just wouldn't work. And they were like, "No, but it's gonna make a cool scene where the plane blows up, so let's go for it."
Yeah. Like, we need an explosion. We'll just make it happen.
It'll be a really great scene where none of anything matters except one person dies. That's it.
Yeah.
It's not relevant to anything at all. It just fills out an episode.
Yeah. Like, I really need to kill this character. How do I do it? Plane. Okay.
Well, on a side note, plane. Boom. On a side note, I had a pretty good reading week.
Nice.
I finished Blood Meridian.
Excellent.
And there's nothing I can really add to the conversation. I loved it.
It's super good.
It's one of the most harrowing books I've ever fucking read in my life. And it was really good stuff. I also finished a review copy of The Long Shalom by Zachary Rosenberg.
Excellent.
And this comes out next month. It is a blast.
Nice. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
I'll read the back real quick. It's Alan Aldenberg is a down on his luck detective with dwindling fortunes, and the worry of his old friend and the Jewish mob will pay him a visit. The last thing he expects is a visit from his old flame. But when the wrong Shalom brings Erica Nakamura back into his door, Alan learns that innocent people are missing all through New York. Agreeing to the job for the cash, Alan soon discovers a conspiracy reaching through the city halls of power, and not all of them are human. Joining forces with old friends, Alan faces a dark alliance of politicians, the mob, and abominable beings that transcend space and time. With the fate of New York in the balance, Alan must be prepared for nightmares beyond human comprehension. That may even make him face the Long Shalom.
That sounds dope.
It is a fun, pulpy noir adventure that dives pretty deep into some Jewish mythology stuff.
Nice.
And it is a blast. Like, I need to read his Western that he just put out, but Zachary Rosenberg is definitely someone to look out for in like the indie horror scene.
Good to know. Always looking for more.
Right.
Yeah, no, he's really good. I also read a kind of sci-fi horror book called Humanity Lost by Meghan Douglass.
I think I've heard of this one.
It's 53 pages. And
Perfect.
Have you guys ever heard about the Donner Party?
Yeah.
Of course.
Well, picture the Donner Party, but in space.
What?
All right, I'm there.
And that's Humanity Lost.
That sounds like fun.
It is pretty much what it is the people on the spaceship, they traveled, they're making some delivery, and they're returning to Earth. And what they have on their ship is vital to, like, pushing human sciences further. And their ship malfunctions, and all of them wake up from cryosleep earlier than they were supposed to. And there's not enough supplies on the ship to keep them fed. And they turn to cannibalism.
Oh yeah.
As one does.
And then one of them kind of begins sabotaging things around the ship to kind of injure people and kind of pick people off.
Oh yeah.
Because they really enjoy eating human meat. And it kind of follows them as the cannibalism corrupts everybody around on the ship.
Sounds like fun.
And the ending itself, like, the ending was really great gut punch of an ending. I won't spoil the ending, I'll just say this. There is one survivor. And it has a really good final sentence. So it's worth checking out. It's a fun little read.
It's funny with all, like, and I love sci-fi stuff, and I'm not disparaging this or anything, but like I would never trust a cryo sleep in anything, because in like all of these movies and books, they always fail.
Yeah.
Like, I've never actually read one where they were like, I mean, maybe Futurama it worked, but like like it always seems to fail and open up way too early, and it's just like such like a janky project that people have, and they're like, oh, it should sleep you for 500 years, but who knows? Good
The
luck.
idea behind it is like if you stay in the cryo chamber, if you don't have an extended period of sleep, and you're stuck on a spaceship for like 5 years as it travels through its thing, right? Like mentally, you're not going to hold on too well.
It's true. I saw that Ren and Stimpy episode. Space madness, man.
And then besides that, I did read one manga, which, if you are a fan of Full Metal Alchemist, the author behind the Full Metal Alchemist manga has a new one out called Daemons of the Shadow Realm. And it is a really good, like, action battle supernatural manga. It starts off in this mountain village, and as it reveals, our main character has connection to these two spirits that guard the village, and other people have other bonds to these other spirits as well, and battles happen. And it has a really interesting power system that I can't really describe because I haven't gone into too much detail of it yet. The first volume is only the first 4 chapters. But if you like Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, give this one a shot because it is a lot of fun. And it captures kind of the same vibes. It has good drama, good action, and good comedy. And then I started reading the new Frank Bill novel called Back to the Dirt, which I was talking to you about a little bit ago, Matt.
Yeah.
And it's pretty much about a Vietnam veteran who is struggling to control his PTSD and gets caught up with a scheme that his stripper girlfriend's brother has concocted where he has murdered oxy dealers and has taken their oxy supply. And our main character is now stuck with a murderous oxy dealer and his stripper girlfriend and his PTSD, which is kind of going out of control. And it is a wild ride so far, but that's it on my end. Matt, what about you?
All right. Yes. So I read, let's see, we'll start first with Zachary Ashford's Polyphemus, which is, I knew it might actually not even be out just yet. It's from, I think, Darklit Press. Anyway, doesn't matter. Polyphemus. It is about a heavy metal, kind of black metal group. Their lead singer got really hooked on drugs and passed out on stage, and subsequently caused the band to kind of fall apart. But the story kind of picks up with him getting out of rehab, trying to reconnect with the band and release their new record because they are contractually obligated to have a new record out. And so they're trying to figure out their stuff, but at the same time, our lead singer kind of meets up with this sort of cult and ends up getting kind of possessed by a demon who wants to, it's not even a demon. We find out later it's something else, but wants to kind of use this band to spread their evil, monstrous message. It's actually really good. I think I liked it more on this look of a band that's just on the verge of breaking it in whatever scene. In this case, it's the black metal kind of heavy metal scene. And it's just showing what that does to them, what each of their personal lives are kind of like. And, you know, one is an alcoholic that just is obsessed with this band and is willing to do anything to get it going. Another one really likes the band, but his wife doesn't like the band and is kind of putting their lives, threatening divorce and taking his child if he doesn't quit this band. Another one, their drummer, he's fine with the band, but he also has a chance to join this other kind of more popular group and is trying to decide what to do there. And so it's just this really fascinating kind of look on getting all these different personalities together to kind of create music and be together. And, you know, it's kind of that family thing and just seeing how they all interact together. And then interspersed, you have kind of demonic possessions and people getting murdered and all this stuff. I enjoyed it. I'm a bit of a fan. I like kind of heavier stuff and darker stuff like that. I'm not super huge into it, but I know enough about different things. This book, though, definitely makes you want to listen to more. Just the way Zach describes how these bands play music and just describes the music and the energy and everything. You're kind of like, all right, I'm on board. I need to listen to some of this stuff.
So
And
Matt,
yes.
Does this mean you're finally going to give up ska?
No, but I can have more than one taste. But yeah, no, there's a ton of Easter eggs in here. Each chapter's a song title from a different band that Zach really likes, and he tells you what they're all from, and he kind of gives you some ideas on like, hey, this is who you should look at, and here's some stuff. He also has like he has a playlist and all it. I love it. If you're into that kind of thing, even just if you're into like kind of the band biopics of like what a band is doing and everything like that, it's definitely worth checking out. Even if like the horror thing is sort of light, in my opinion, I think he could have cut it and it still would have been fine. I get why he puts it in there and what that does, but the band part's way more fascinating. Other one I read is Danger Slater's new book coming out in June, A House of Rot. And this book is amazing. This is kind of his, probably in my opinion, his best to date. You can definitely see him taking everything he's done in the past and kind of distilled it through this thing. And basic concept is a newlywed couple gets into like an apartment house that they're renting, and right from the start, the house is full of mold and kind of seals them in, and it's them dealing with being sealed into this house full of mold and mushrooms and just spores, everything like that. It's very gross if you are not a fan of mold, which most people aren't, and or mushrooms, and hopefully you don't mind that stuff because there's a lot of that in here. And it's just this fascinating kind of look at this day and age, what you should want your future to be and kind of like where you're going to want to go and what you want to do with life and just what this world is like at the time. There's a lot of kind of his silly humor in there where one thing they own that's like new, everything else in this house that they brought is kind of old and used, but there's this fancy new mattress they have. It's this big fancy micro thing mattress that, you know, all the rage these days, fancy new mattresses. And so it's just, but the idea of them being like, we're on our way because we're adults because we bought this brand new mattress and this is our first step towards a new life and everything like that. But it's got all of his humor in it, and also all of the stuff that, like, if you've listened to our earlier podcast episodes when we've talked about his work, where kind of underneath his humor, there's usually a pretty dark undertone or a very interesting undertone. It's the same with this one, and it even stands out just a hair more, which is good in a good way. I mean that when I say that, it's just it's fascinating to kind of see his progression and where he's going with it. So this is, like I said, coming out in June, Tenebris Press, House of Rot, super good. And I did see Fast X. I'm not going to go into too many details other than it's awesome. Jason Momoa is amazing in this movie. Give him any kind of crazy villain character from now on because he steals every scene he's in. So
he destroyed the family?
I'm not gonna spoil that. I'll just say it ends on a cliffhanger. There's gonna be another movie. There's supposed to be 2 movies, and I have some theories on what those movies are, but I won't say anything because people need to see this one first. So but I loved it, and I don't even think you need to see the other ones to get what's happening here. They do a really funny squeeze-in scene that's almost like here's where we've done so far in the last 9 movies scene. So they kind of cover everything really fast in a really funny way. So anyway, that was my week.
Nice. I'm glad to hear about House of Rot.
Yeah, it's rad.
Yeah, I've got his Little Miss Apocalypse sitting over here. I haven't read it yet, but and I
that
have
one's so good too.
I hashed some stuff out with him in regards to the like back cover material for House of Rot. We talked some stuff over, and that was good fun. I've been curious about it. I hope it takes the fuck off. He deserves it. He's really, really fucking good.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, he's I adore his work. He's really fun. And yeah, no, it's cool reading this one because it, like I said, it's interesting having read most of his work, and then when you get to this one, like you can see what he's done, but you can see he's kind of pushed himself past what he's done, and I don't want to say he's trying something new, but he's doing something different with his style that I really liked in this.
All right, that's a good.
And Dan,
good stuff.
Yeah. Do you have any media consumption for this last week?
I mean, I saw Guardians of the Galaxy 3. I loved it. It was the first time a Marvel movie has made me care since No Way Home, or a Marvel anything has made me care since No Way Home.
Yeah, I hear that.
I'm reading Our Share of the Night, which I fully expect to be really good once I get into it. Far more, but I haven't gotten far enough into it to really make any comment. Far more significant for me this week was I went down and I participated in the writer's strike at Netflix and Paramount down in LA, and that was a really wonderful experience. A lot of people hitting the very hot pavement for very long hours down there, and throw out all the shout outs possible to them, because this fight, I think, is just I don't know the right metaphor here, but like it's the very tip of the iceberg. What's coming for them is going to all be coming for us, and a victory for them could, things are going to shake one way or another, and we wanted to shake one way very much in this situation because huge things are happening right now in the creative world, especially where it intersects with industry. And that's all I have to say. Let's talk Stephen King, you guys.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like this is kind of like a loose conversation just about why Stephen King is just so long lasting in the genre. Because I mean, I can go back to any of you guys, but like, when did you guys first come across Stephen King?
I mean, for me, it was middle school. I read The Stand. It super fucked me up, but also, but had it electrified me on a like an atomic level that I had never felt before. As much as I loved reading, I felt MOON. That
spells childhood trauma.
Yep. I tried to hide that book from myself. Like, I'd stick it in the back of a cupboard. Like, the problem is I always knew where I hid it, so I'd always find it and continue. But then it was also the first book too, where 2 months after reading it, I was like, I wonder how Glenn's doing. And then I had to be like, wait, or Stu or whatever. Like, Stu's not real, Daniel.
Yeah.
Like, he's not a person that's like having a life somewhere that you need to give that you can call on your phone and be like, hey, what's up, what's up, Stu? How have things been since whatever? Like that, but it had that effect on me. It was significant to me.
Yeah, I think just the way he, especially with the longer books, and I'll get my story in a second, but just to kind of riff off of that, I think with his longer stuff, or even like the Dark Tower books, the way he can write his characters, and there can be lots of comments about the way he writes his characters, but just there's such like a folksy thing that you kind of feel like they come across as real enough that you do think those things, or you get so attached. I remember finishing the last Dark Tower book, and as wacky as it kind of turns out, still kind of thinking about like them and thinking about those characters and just like where they went and what they did and all that stuff. So yeah, I can see that. Or even like, I guess just it's King, and for me and King, it's interesting, like, because it was kind of like a 3-pronged story. Like, I think I saw Maximum Overdrive way too young, and just remembering as a kid, you remember all the over the topness of the trucks and everything like that, and just being fascinated by that silly world that he built in that movie, and just like being hooked, but not really knowing it was
this
King.
machine just called me an asshole.
Right, exactly. It's just so coke fueled King, but like not like fully understanding who he was at the time, just knowing and like having younger parents that showed us that, being like, oh yeah, that's just that Stephen King guy. And then so that was like a little bit of the groundwork. And then in 5th grade, our teacher read us I can never remember the name of it, but the Army Men story from Night. Which one?
Soldiers.
Yeah. So was that Battleground, I think?
Yeah, Battleground.
From Night Shift. And so he read that to us in class, and that just like huge hit me at the right time. Again, it's like weird to think about. I don't doubt anyone would read that story to 5th graders now, but like early 90s, that was cool just to take time out of your 5th grade class to read Battlegrounds. And so then after that, it was sort of this hooked like feeling, and just buying everything I could. And like, I think what really kind of cemented it was probably The Stand and It miniseries, which also came out around that time. And after that, it was just hooked.
That's awesome. Yeah, for me, my friend's mom was like a big Stephen King fan and had like all his books in hardcover. And every time I'd just like be amazed at all these books. But I didn't, the first Stephen King book I read, it was high school, and I borrowed what was that one that he wrote right after he got hit by the car?
Was it Dreamcatchers?
Yeah.
Yeah, Dreamcatchers. And that's a terrible first Stephen King book. That was a bad choice on my end, because that book is just so weird. But
Yeah.
What really got me on Stephen King is when I was a kid, I always remember seeing references to The Shining, and like always a blood elevator is like a reference I'd always see here and here again in pop culture. And it wasn't until actually seeing The Shining when like that movie just really kind of hit me on a level where very few movies do. But then when I even read the book eventually, and just the humanity Stephen King gave to his characters in that book just elevated that work to a whole new level for me. Where it became one of my favorite haunted house novels, but also it's just a really great like family trauma novel.
Yeah.
That has a lot of heart, and that's one thing I think that King's work kind of sticks out for me is his work has a lot of heart in it. It always goes to a place of empathy. It always comes to a place of emotion, and there's always a really good catharsis element in a lot of his novels.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I think he starts often from a place of deep empathy, and I think there's a way to branch off with this discussion into like 1,000 other mini discussions. That's one of the reasons for me why his older work in particular resonates or continues to resonate so deeply. It's why my favorite book of his is the original version of The Stand as opposed to the uncut version of The Stand, is because tonally the original version approaches its characters and its subject material from a place of deeper empathy, I think, than the uncut version does. That's a huge striking facet of what makes King's work so timeless. I think there's just a number of things when we're talking about, debatably the greatest American novelist who's ever lived, is certainly one of them. There's probably going to be a number of things you can say that person does well. But yeah, that's a significant one.
Well, and I think it's fascinating talking about that, and even just, one of the greatest out. You kind of think about like his, heyday, I guess late 70s and 80s, and you think about who was the big names also. And we'll just stick with like horror. I mean, we'll stick with the big ones that you find at the grocery stores and everywhere. You got Kuntz, you got King, and then to a lesser extent in grocery store world, you have Barker. And it's just fascinating to kind of think about like who, when you look at like those three, it's like, and if we say look at adaptations of stuff, I mean, it's amazing that King out of those three is the one that gets pulled the most. And I mean, it could just be because he wanted more things adapted. I have no idea, but like it's an interesting to kind of look at and think about like, why was it him as opposed to say these other two? Like, what did he do different than say even Kuntz? And again, a million opinions can be said about Kuntz. We won't go into all of them, but like
better Kuntz.
Yeah. But like even like even if you like kind of look at that, because like I agree, but like for a long time, I mean, it seemed like they both were having books come out at the same time. I feel like Kuntz's library is probably just as big, maybe a little less big, but is up there with King's library. So it's just fascinating to kind of even think about it.
I think like Kuntz has written more books than Stephen King, because there was a time in the 80s where he was publishing 4 books a year under like 3 different pen names.
Yeah. So which again just goes to like, well, why? What is it? The heart in King's stories that made him kind of stick out more?
I mean, you can make certainly. There's a number of things. I think at the end of the day, it's not really and for the record, it's not really a dig against Kuntz to say King is better than Kuntz, because like
no, this is the record. This is for the record. It's official. I'm joking.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think like I'm sure if you like sat in a private back room somewhere with Kuntz would admit King is better than Kuntz. Like it's not. We're talking about like you've got Eminem quoting Stephen King's works and songs. There's something that Stephen King has done with, like he has this, like, I mean, it's a number of things, but like fundamentally he has his finger on the pulse of what makes a story special.
Yeah.
What are the elements? And so I think there's room to get really into some nitty gritty stuff if you guys want to get into it here. What, like on a storytelling level, on a technical level, what is it that he taps into?
Yeah.
That
I think for me. Oh, you go. I'm sorry. I spoke over you, Jenny. You can finish what you were saying.
Oh yeah, just what is it that resonates? How is it the construction of his narratives has managed to find things that work their way into the social lexicon, like Cujo, like I said in an Eminem song, or like Pennywise changing the perception of an entire country. Like the perception of clowns everywhere. Yeah. Like people are, we all have this idea of like being scared of clowns. It's really interesting when you get into it and you discover that really wasn't a thing before it. I mean, like I'm sure he tapped into something that kind of like innately was there maybe. But like he totally changed like an entire sweeping cultural context around clowns himself, with this one work. And then you have, any number of things, Carrie, like that became this archetypal story. Well, that's a partially an answer to the question, is his ability to tap into archetypes in a way that's meaningful, fresh, and so on and so forth. But fundamentally, there is something that he's done in his stories through the way he through the heart with the characters, but also the way he constructs his narratives through his voice, that I think would be separate from somebody like Barker or Straub, who perhaps through their prodigious talent, I mean, like, again, we're talking prodigiously talented people, but still still spoke to a smaller subsection of people than King speaks to through his own voice, given his conversational style, as opposed to, Straub's more heady literary style, or Barker's, more effusive, poetic flourish. So, there's just a lot of things to be said here that we can really deep dive into if we want to.
I mean, I think the main thing for me for King is it's his character work. I think his character work is second to none, and most of his characters leap off the page. There is the argument to be made that sometimes he does a couple things that don't age too well, like his reliance on, in Mr. Mercedes, I forget his name, Jerome, I think it is. Jerome, I think, was not that great of a character to read, but
no, he has his particular
tenets.
Yeah, like that. Yeah, that was not a good exploration of the things that he wanted to explore. Jerome,
Yes,
especially Jerome's alternate, feel good delight, like persona, where you have a young black man in the suburbs trying to reconcile his his heritage as a young black man against his upper middle class status in a predominantly white community. There was interesting stuff there to be discussed. King was perhaps not the one to discuss it, and then because it is something that's removed from his own experience, and
yes.
or I mean, it's hard to say, because I think there was a time when I think King has touched on stuff in regards to racism and such, that he did with absolute striking elegance. This just was not one of those circumstances.
No, it was a bad circumstance, but I think what makes those books stand out, like, I personally think the second book in that trilogy, Finders Keepers, I think that's one of King's like top 10 books. Like, I think that's a really great book. But I think what he succeeds in those books is the villain. Great villain. Holly Gibney, I think, is a character that some people find annoying, but for me, she became one of my favorite King characters, and I'm kind of happy he's trying to bring her back and some other stuff. And also just the way he captures like middle class or blue collar life, especially older King, where he focuses on the blue collar life. Like, he writes with such experience in that lifestyle that the characters just really feel authentic.
Very much so. King has always been excelled at a very particular kind of every man or every woman character, which I think is one of the like the differing features between him and his son. With like Joe Hill. Joe Hill tends to focus on more eclectic types, people with striking obsessions and or hobbies, people are a little bit on the fringes ever so slightly of what is perceived as normal. Like there's that stuff with Nosferatu, Hill is very much focused on people with like striking passions and things like that. They're odd, he likes the oddball characters, which again is only relevant for this discussion in that I think as wonderful as that is, it's not tapping into the same kind of archetype or common experience that King does so well. Maybe perhaps I'm all over the place, I guess, with this, but
no, it's all good.
It's valuable. We love it. It's wonderful, and certainly some people are gonna say, "Oh, King, Hill is my guy," as opposed to King. But I think there's something to be said for the way King hits something that feels almost universal, but then manages to make it, unique.
Yeah.
Striking.
Well, and with that, and just in thinking of his stuff and then thinking of other things and other writers and books, the one thing I can kind of sticks out for me, and to go with even the character stuff and his every person kind of look, is he does these great and ensemble casts or character, you think about a lot of these books. The Shining might be the poor example, but you think about other things, The Stand, you think about It, and you think about Desperation, and I had one on the top of my head, just all these different ones where he gives you multiple characters, but kind of like what you were saying, Rich, they're these kind of blue collar people usually. So it kind of gives you this, and they're all different types of blue collar people. So you still get this idea of, as a reader, you're like, oh, I'm like Ben or whatever. I'm like one of these characters in this, and I get their interaction with this other group or why they're stuck with this other group. And I think, again, kind of looking at it from the broader side of just the part of the reason why he sticks and why he's who he is back when you were reading these, you found somebody, or a reader could find one of these main characters in this ensemble as themselves, or somebody they knew. And you look at it again from the grocery store buyer, from the guy that goes to Target and they see a Stephen King book and they pick it up. They know they're going to find themselves. And then even if we look back kind of in the broader spectrum of the 80s and people growing up with King and adults reading King, and then going into the 90s and 2000s, all this stuff, it was kind of, you always had this feeling, and it could be less or more, but you always had you always knew, you're like, I'm going to pick up this book and there's going to be somebody in here that I am familiar with and I can get into and follow. And I wonder, I think that's part of it, is that his name has become such a brand name that people just go in and pick them up and don't even question. Day one, there's going to be a stack of his hardcovers and somebody's going to go buy it just because it's his name sitting there, because they've read his stuff or they had in the past, and they just know that they're going to find a character that's relatable. And kind of like what you were saying, Dan, with Hill's eccentric characters, everybody's a little eccentric in one way or the other, or on a fringe of something, but King is gonna be a little broader in that area where you're this character might be a little bit more obsessed with something, but they're still normal enough that I'm gonna see myself in that.
You mentioned the cast of It, and the thing with that is, they're misfits, but it's a little bit different because he's exploring the idea of what it is to be seen as a misfit, and almost everybody can relate to that.
Yeah.
what it is to be a kid, that's not accepted at some point in their childhood, or that's a little different. That's a universal experience, and it touches, so there's something really striking there. It's definitely about the characters. I think there's also an argument to be made for a sort of psychological thing that happens when we talk about King. We're kind of also talking about, arguably, about the pioneer of a very particular kind of stream of conscious style that, again, he arguably pioneered it. There's a lot of great work before King, but that that connects with the characters, that resonates deeply. But what King managed, I'm sure somebody's going to be able to like quote some obscure thing or whatever, if they make reference to it. So maybe if I'm not going to like lay the claim that he invented this, he certainly popularized it. He certainly mastered it in a way that since then it's become not just like an accepted style, but like maybe even arguably the accepted style when it comes to writing characters. And there's a terminology for like the third person point of view that's different versus immersive, or that's distant from the character and observing them like a camera overhead, versus one that's fully immersive and meshed in the stream of conscious style, which, just to dig a little bit deeper, is fundamentally King understands how people think. So even if he's touching upon somebody who has a different lived experience than you, the way that character thinks still has some sort of mirroring to the way that you might think, and therefore there's sort of there's a molding there that happens. You're a brain melding or whatever. You're kind of almost being tricked on a psychological level to empathize with this character just by the way that they are thinking and the way that you yourself think.
Yeah, it's just like thinking of that. And Rich and I earlier were just talking about stories that we've covered of his in the past. And one of the things that I just kind of think of and remember is just like, it's not quite non sequiturs that he throws in, but just that kind of like humorous, but almost like your brain goes in a weird spot when these, and that's what you're talking about. Like the way he writes that, he writes these characters and they're thinking like 10 different thoughts that aren't simply focused on, gee, there's this monster or this terrible thing is happening. The brain is kind of going and doing this thing. And I think you're absolutely right. It captures, because we can't help that our brain is going with a million different things at all one time.
We all have like these little like idiosyncratic misfires, these little like personal Lisi's story both maybe gets a lot of flack, and I think arguably unjustified flack.
I love Lisi's story. It's a really great book.
It is. It's one of his best. And the way it explores like the interior language of a relationship.
Yep. I think Revival gets a lot of bad rap, but I think that's one of his best books.
Yeah. Revival is another one of his best books too, but not to get like sidetracked on like the reputation of a book, but just to talk about a tool that's or something that's like very interesting that he's exploring in these things, but also universal, is what Lisi's story, first off, like the interior language of this relationship that this husband and wife have. But on the same time, we also, like, on the same token, we ourselves have our own interior language that is unique to ourselves.
Yep.
The way, things that are like inside jokes essentially. Like, you talk about these recurring phrases that pop up in his books and stuff like that. You mentioned that, Matt. And these things are what make us individuals.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah, I don't know.
No, but it's
I
true.
don't know,
It's like, oh, go ahead.
I was saying, just King, the way he writes his characters and the way he develops his characters, they all feel like they have lived a life. They
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
feel real. They all feel unique. I don't think he's written the same character twice. I think he has some tropes of characters he relies on, but that's a different conversation to have. I do feel that a lot of his characters feel real and feel like they live in the world that we're reading in. And it feels like he does a good job of capturing their experience.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I'm kind of being vague here, but the idea is, like, if you take a look at Stu Redmond, for example, in The Stand, right?
Yeah.
Stu feels like a real person. Like, he feels like he could exist in our world. All his character, and Stu's unique to himself, where when you're reading a Stu Redmond passage, you're reading a Stu Redmond passage.
Yeah, the voice is definitely, it's just definitely there. Like,
But I have a question for you. What is your favorite King trope?
I don't know.
Because mine is when a character witnesses something either so insane or so scary that their hair just turns white.
That's a thing.
It happens a lot in the story. It happens a lot in King books. Like, I always find it humorous when he adds it, because I'm like, oh, he did it again. But like, it's a thing that happens. But at the same time, I find it humorous that it's kind of it's a trope I see him use quite a bit in his stories.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a King trope or just like a horror trope that he also adapted. I think that happened in a lot of Lovecraft's works as well too.
Some Lovecraft's works, like, I'm thinking again, Pet Cemetery, when, like, we see our main character is just like his hair is just pure white by the end of that book. I also love Pet Cemetery. That's one of my favorite King books, but I digress.
Sure. Yeah, I think then there's something to be said too on kind of a different, like, every conversation with King and his success and what resonates with the character is going to come back to the characters ultimately, I think, because that is like such a key fundamental part of storytelling. If we want to dissect the way he writes and constructs his narratives a little bit too, there's something to be said for his rejection of ambiguity and his refusal to write twists.
Yeah,
are very key. I have an entire multiple shelves of King books here, and the only book in any, the only novel in any of them that has a twist is The Outsider. And spoilers, but 200 pages in, the person you think is going to be the main character dies. That's arguably the only twist he's ever written in long form. And I think there's a strong argument to be made that the book gets a lot worse as soon as it happens. But I think that's not incidental or not coincidental to why he is so successful or why a lot of his stories are so timeless. I don't think we find timeless. I don't think there are many timeless stories out there that are constructed around a big, whoa, you didn't see that coming twist.
Yeah.
Like, people talk about like To Kill a Mockingbird, and they're not like, oh yeah, remember that moment when we found out that like, the dog didn't have, or I don't know, like, it's not some big groundbreaking, ground shaking revelation. But I think there's also a significant difference between a revelation and a twist. But that's also a digressing sort of point.
No, but that's fascinating, and like I didn't really think about it, but I think that makes sense because you think about like in Shyamalan, or even like I think we had brought, maybe before this it was Rich and I had brought Fight Club and some of these other things that are kind of, I don't want to say built on the twist, but the twist is a big part of it, and it's like it's cool, but it's not like a sustained, like you're not gonna have the same impact watching it or reading it over and over because you know what the twist is. You might want to see it again just so you can look at what the clues are. But like talking about King and Timeless, is he doing that kind of leads again to like what we talked about earlier with the characters and everything. Does that kind of get you more focused on what the characters are, who the characters are? You're not reading it expecting, okay, what's King gonna throw at me? It's like he might not be telling you step by step what he's gonna throw at you, but like, you know what I mean? Where the twist, you're kind of always like on the edge of your seat, but with King, you're focused more on like, okay, these are the characters and how are they dealing with the situation to get to whatever their end point is, and that allows you to sink in more than once and not get tired of it. And I think that's interesting.
Yeah. It is. And, it's interesting, too, because King often does tell you what's going to happen. And I think that's hand in hand why things are that's hand in hand, I think, with the success that he's had as a storyteller. Not talking necessarily about financial success, but again, what makes it timeless.
Yeah.
And to touch upon the Shyamalan thing, I would argue that's the reason, for instance, the revelation at the end of The Sixth Sense is so successful. Why that? I think The Sixth Sense is a timeless story. But what's interesting here, I think there's a distinction, because I think Shyamalan has spent a lot of time trying to recapture that.
Yeah.
But where he's failed is for a lot of these things, for a lot of these stories, he's writing these big subversive twists, like with The Sixth Sense. Okay, so this takes a kind of a broader discussion on what's the difference between a twist and a revelation. I think a revelation takes the narrative architecture that is already there and shows it it brings everything together. It builds upon. There's something that we call like a keystone in a narrative architecture. That's a revelation. It introduces the keystone, that piece that holds everything together. A twist is a wrecking ball for a story, typically. It just brings in whatever and it just demolishes and says this is what it's been the whole time, essentially. And for that reason too, twists, a story that's building up to a twist is oftentimes restricted by the twist. It gets claustrophobic because it has to obey the rules of this thing that it's not showing. The reason why The Sixth Sense works is because the revelation that Will Smith is dead doesn't change anything. It only contextualizes it. It's the
Wait,
denouement.
don't you mean Bruce Willis?
What?
Don't you mean Bruce Willis?
Who did I say?
Will Smith?
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah, Bruce Willis.
I was like, wait, is this like a Sinbad moment here? Like,
no. Yeah, so Bruce Willis. So it doesn't change anything in the narrative. Everything that you saw that matters, is still real. None of it is undermined by the revelation that he's dead. It's only enhanced. It's the denouement. It happens after the plot has already reached a satisfying ending. It just brings everything together. Why is Haley Joel Osment so kind of what's the right word? He's a little cagey around Bruce Willis at the beginning. It's because Bruce Willis is fucking dead, and that's a little scary. He doesn't know why this dude who is dead is like attaching himself to him. Why is his wife so distant from him? Because he's dead.
Yeah.
He's not really there in that scene. You know, like
all
of these things all of a sudden make sense. It doesn't go back and have to explain that. It doesn't have to undermine the plot that's already there.
Yeah.
So I know I've been rambling, but with King, his refusal to do ambiguity by and large or twists is inversely. I think it represents complete confidence in the story that he is telling, and commitment to that story. I think that's a key part of what makes his stuff so timeless.
Yeah.
You trust him. He's not trying to trick you. He's saying, this matters. This is important. I know what I'm trying to tell with this story. Take my hand. Come with me. We're going to explore every corner of this thing. You know, I'm not going to like try to like gotcha, you know.
Yeah. That also, I feel that being said too is like, I know a lot of people like to kind of crap on newer King versus older King, but honestly, like, I just love getting a new King book and just having that familiar Stephen King narration just for the beginning.
Yep.
It's like a
I
comfort
agree.
voice.
It is. That's something to be said for how Straub talks about it. Peter Straub, in one of his books, he talks about like how Stephen King is was one of the most intelligent people that he knew. But the way Stephen King writes is very accessible.
Yeah.
Very conversationally driven, and that's by design. You know, that sort of him branding himself as like you know, that he talks about how he's like the McDonald's of whatever is a little bit, it's a little bit like overly humble because he knows he's not McDonald's. But at the same time, it's an intentional branding decision to be like, hey, I'm your Uncle Steve. Come sit by the fire with me while I tell you this little yarn here. Nothing pretentious about it. Nothing whatever. We're just gonna, you know, but you're gonna enjoy it. I think. Like, I gotcha. Like, there's something to be said about that.
Yeah.
All elements. You know.
Yeah. Well, and I think even with that, like, and I was just thinking of like with the characters, if we kind of look at the other side, his villains they fit that idea too of Uncle Steve telling you a story. They're fascinating, like, and I know we keep using timeless, but it's true. It's like these I'm not gonna say monsters. These villains are just this timeless creation that they're so good and they have such depth to what they're doing and what they are. And I think we said earlier with like clowns and Pennywise. I mean, Pennywise now is just ubiquitous. He's everywhere. Like, you can find his stuff you can find him at a store and buy a Funko Pop or a stuffed animal of Pennywise the clown, and it's just because he's this like great villain. And like, you think about, and I'm gonna draw a complete blank on the name, Count Orlok, right? Count Orlok from Salem's Lot. like this vampire villain that is just, that's, he made this amazing vampire that's not our typical, especially like everyone kind of talks about way vampires are displayed today, but like you think about this monster he created, and like, the Stand, Randall Flagg is just this he does this thing, and it's just so fascinating, and like I love it, like as much as the good guy characters, I love the villains and what he does with those, and I think that's something that kind of sticks with everybody.
Yeah.
And again, it's that Uncle Steve telling you the story, and it's like, well, this is going to be a scary monster, but it's not going to be just your typical scary boogity man. It's going to be something different and creepy.
I think too, you kind of brushed up on something there in terms of conventions as well. I think it's a proportional thing where it's, where I talked about narrative architecture before. So if you're viewing a story as a house with lots of different rooms in it and a basement and all this different stuff, many Stephen King stories foundationally they're a horror story built upon a fantasy foundation, which again I think is a contributing factor towards why they resonate so well. You have this human element, you have all of these different things, you have the memorable characters, sure, you have the conversational voice, but on a foundational level, you also have this sort of assurance, which is in its own right a comforting thing. And getting into the idea of like what's a comforting read. You have this assurance for the most part. He deviates against this sometimes, but again, you have an assurance that there is something benevolent in the universe. There is something fateful that is pulling things towards a good outcome. It has a group of, however, 7 chosen children, Yeah. They're the chosen kids fighting against evil, So there's this like ultimate distillation towards good versus evil in a lot of his books that takes a hopeful bend at the end of the day. More often than not, books like Pet Sematary or Revival sort of being the exception to the rule. But then in the broader context of his library, kind of reinforcing the hopeful in their own way too, I think. Yeah. Arguably.
There's a big optimism at the heart of a lot of his work.
Sorry?
I said that he has a sense of optimism.
Yeah.
That you don't see as often in many other horror writers, I feel.
And I think that optimism is also sort of reflected in the sort of the human element, the empathetic element. When you talk about, like particularly like his decision with Jack Torrance to not make him an unequivocal monster, to really make him a father who loved his kid, who is multidimensional and maybe loses that really fateful battle with the forces of the Overlook and the own forces.
Yeah, definitely. And that's, I was kind of like thinking about that with like the good versus evil thing. And I think that is, and again, that's what is going to attract and keep readers, is they're going to expect this kind of thing. The other thing I think is kind of fascinating with him, and I'm looking over at my Green Mile novella or serial stuff, is he always kind of, and he's not the only one, but he is somebody that always was kind of playing with kind of like ideas even outside of like a book form. Again, I brought up Maximum Overdrive, where he's like, I'm going to direct this and I'm going to do this thing. And personally, I like it. And I think a lot of people do too, but it's not the best movie in the world, but he was somebody who said, I'm going to do that. Or Green Mile that came out, I think six books came out one after another. They were only like a couple bucks per book, and that's like, I think John Saul did it around the same time too, but you kind of think like him trying that something completely different. Or you have him writing Desperation and then writing as Richard Bachman as the Regulators, but the two books are sort of are tied together, and that's something somebody hasn't done. Or even like, and I know for you were going to say, what were you going to say?
I also said when he released Blockade Billy as a mini hardcover as well.
Yeah, exactly. And like, even if we look at something like nowadays, we have all these interconnected, MCU kind of stuff like that, where all these different properties are tied together. Yeah. But like, if you look at him, that's what he was doing, that kind of thing. Yeah. I mean, like a little bit later, but he was still doing that with the Dark Tower stuff and having this huge world universe. And that's is cool to like think that he was branching out and like, hey, I'm gonna do something different, and I'm going to try these different things, and hey, they might work, they might not, but I'm gonna give it a whirl and see what happens. And usually it worked for him.
Well, yeah, and I think again, this all is part of the conversation, of course, of why his works. There's something to be said for. Oh man, there's just a lot to be said for that. He was writing the original universe. This all is a part of a similar universe, but stuff. There's Easter eggs. There's all that for the fans. But and there's something to be said about. We could have a discussion about empathy in earlier King works versus in later King works, and I think this is like there's a bit of a distinction there. I think his earlier works were more consistently empathetic, a little more serious. He became a little more jokey later in his career, and I think some of that is arguably a result of the literary crowd not taking him as seriously as he should have been taken as a writer because of the subject matter he chose to write about. I don't want to get too much of like the digression there, but I do think beyond his really prodigious talent, beyond everything else, there's something to be said for the confidence he brings into his storytelling. Like you said, whether this is going to work or not, there's that infamous, he's going to do it. So like, we all know the infamous sex scene in it, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people out there, and maybe even he himself would say he would have done it differently now. But like, if you ask me personally, should that scene be removed? Should it be cut? So on and so forth. Does that scene make me uncomfortable? Yes, that scene makes me uncomfortable.
It's supposed to.
Would I rather not have that scene in the book? Hell no, I want it. Leave it in there, because there's something to be said about adult fiction being challenging.
Yeah.
Making you uncomfortable. And there's also something to be said for, like, maybe it was a little off the mark, but it represents an author who is writing with the utmost conviction in his storytelling. And for every moment that leads him wrong, there's dozens of moments it leads him right. You can't have one without the other.
Yeah.
I don't think. Like, personally, it's...
Yeah.
Like,
well, and I think that, I think that was him just confident and knowing that him knowing that he could rest on his laurels and just do the same thing, but him saying like, no, I want to do something different. And I want to put in this story something that is a little bit more challenging, because, hey, partly I know that the everyday reader is going to pick up this book. It's not going to be the hardcore horror or literary fiction person that's buying my book. And since I know I have this audience, I'm gonna give them something to kind of think to chew on.
Yeah, and so there's a thing going on with that scene in that book too. It is, well, first off, maybe a controversial statement, but if you are able to separate yourself from like the kind of general ickiness of it,
yeah,
like just if you're able to sort of like separate yourself from that, it is one of the most beautifully written scenes in the whole damn novel. Maybe one of the most beautifully written scenes he's ever put down. There's a refrain in there with Beverly where she, it's from her point of view, and she's there's this whole refrain with the birds and birds taking flight that's touching upon something like nature and grace and love and unity, like friendship, companionship. I mean, it's touching upon, it's doing something really special on a really, really, really deep level, I think. That is, yes, hard to see if you're made too uncomfortable to get there by what's actually happening. He talks about that scene as, like the when he was writing it, he said he didn't really see it for just like the physical what's happening. He saw it as another glass bridge, that whole metaphor, right?
I think so.
There's the glass bridge between the child's library and the adult library, and he sees that, and that whole thing, like that physical architecture, is a metaphor for like the growing up process. So the whole book deals, of course, with turning into an adult and so on and so forth. And what the kids are essentially doing in this moment is forcing themselves to take this one final physical but also kind of metaphoric step towards becoming adult to break its magic over them, because it doesn't have the same kind of magical pull over adults. So it's sex. It's like the final threshold.
Yeah.
It creates for something that's really fucking uncomfortable. But it's the book. I mean, at the end of the day, for me, the question is the book more interesting with it or without it?
Yeah.
And I think it's more interesting with it. And again, I think this, just to close off, connects to the broader argument in the sense that King has always gone to uncomfortable places, but in a very honest way. And that's what, one of the things about like his insightfulness into, the better and worst parts of humanity and his characters and like, all that.
For me, my last King thing, because I got to wrap stuff up soon. But I wanted to say, one thing that always stuck with me for King is like, if you look at The Shining and Jack's slow descent back into alcoholism, and just his mannerisms and how his mannerisms change and the subtlety behind everything. Like, what is he? He's chewing aspirin.
Yeah, he chews aspirin.
Yeah, like the whole like he starts chewing aspirin, and that's so you know something's off. And even like his wife is like, "What's like you're chewing? Are you drinking again?" He's like, "No, I'm not drinking." And she's like, "No, that's what you're doing. You're drinking. Like, are you drinking?" Like, but it's just the small little details he adds to these characters to make them feel more real. Really helps sleep off the page, and also giving his own history with alcoholism and drug abuse. He writes about those topics with just a sobering honesty.
Yeah.
That you don't see through a lot of authors.
Yeah, he definitely like can capture himself, and sometimes literally, but capture himself into the story and make it make sense. You know, and I know you want to wrap up, but like a lot of people have said in the past on Twitter and everywhere else like that, King was definitely the start, a big read for a lot of people when they were younger. And it's interesting in that, because you do like some of these things you don't as a kid fully grasp like what this all means, but like it's like a good maybe a good's not the right word, but it's definitely an introduction to some of these things, or allow you to kind of see some of these things and be like, oh, that I get it now because I see somebody act like this or do this or whatever it may be. And I think this time, like this overall topic of his timelessness. And I think that's one of these things that he kind of helps almost educate people on in life, like just that idea of talking about The Shining and reading that as a younger kid, and like get it, like seeing what these actions are and seeing it from the kid's point of view and then from the adult's point of view. Yeah. And you're like, you pick something, like you're getting something out of it, and you're like, okay, like I see this, or I'm learning about love and bullies and adulthood and finding friends, and your friends might not all be normal type friends, and their lives are completely different. Like he has that way to get you to understand it, especially like coming from being an 80s kid and being a 90s kid. Like a lot of the media that you saw back then kind of gave you that shiny view on life, or a very fantastical view on life. But reading King at those times, you were looking at something and being like, okay, like this is besides the crazy elements that he throws in there, you're like, I get this, like I see this, and I understand these people that are around me a little bit better because of the way King experienced his own things and threw them in there. It's I think that all kind of made him work.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rich too, like the alcoholism thing is an interesting point to bring up. You mentioned Jack Torrance, and then if you think about King's own struggle with alcoholism, and
then Dr. Sleep, how it reflects with Danny as well.
Yeah, there's that. And then you look at books like, you think about books that aren't necessarily, don't even necessarily have that subject at the forefront of them, but like a book like Salem's Lot. If you reread Salem's Lot right now and look for it, that's like the thirstiest book I've ever read. Everybody in that book is like, man, I can't wait from 2 hours from now before I'm able to just like drink 7 beers.
Like, well, Salem's Lot, that's when he began drinking a lot, was he was writing that book.
Well, yeah, I think he was drinking a lot before then too, because he used to talk about like being so broke, but like, just a 6-pack of beer and writing whatever, like trying to find his way toward Carrie, in those years toward Carrie.
Yeah.
And stuff. And I think Salem's Lot is probably right around that time he like, it probably got a little worse because he probably had more money for it, I would guess.
I've read a thing for him where he was talking about while he was writing Salem's Lot, his mother died, and he had to give the eulogy at her funeral while he was shit-faced because he couldn't stop drinking while he was writing Salem's Lot.
Yeah, and it reads, and then you get to like The Shining, and it's like a book about somebody who knows they have a problem and they're wrestling with it and they're white knuckling it and they're struggling. There's this very interesting progression there in his earlier works, of course, finally leading towards, his eventual sobriety when, in the years following, like Tommy Knocker and stuff.
Then hit the 80s when he was just cooked out of his mind, and that was that was a phase.
Oh, for sure. But again, I think there's also something to be said, like, and I mentioned Eminem earlier too. One of the reasons Eminem struck such a deep footing was his kind of unvarnished, self-deprecating honesty
Yeah.
about his own life. And I think Stephen King does that in his own way with the alcoholism. He gets into this stuff that's like, we're so fucked up but beautiful in our own right. It's just, there's such deep empathy towards these people. He had a choice. Annie Wilkes could have been just a monster. No, she's a deeply, deeply tragic character in the original book. You kind of care for her, even, there's something there that had life gone a different way might have been, she might not have been so broken.
Indeed. But I'm looking forward to King's new book when it comes out this September.
The Holly one?
Yeah. I like Holly as a character. I know a lot of people don't, but
I like Holly as a character, but I don't like what happens to King's writing when he's writing about Holly.
We should get a cancel button and be like, canceled.
Me?
I'm joking.
Me?
I'm canceled? No, yeah, I get it. Though. I mean, I just think that he's got a tenderness towards her that gets in the way of the narrative.
I can understand that. Maybe
I don't think anything bad is ever going to happen to Holly because he cares for her too much.
Maybe something bad will happen to her in this new novel. Only one way to find out.
If it does, I'm there for it because I've been waiting for it. But nothing bad ever happens to her. It's always like, oh, she's running into a psychopath. I wonder if she's going to get hurt. Oh no, the psychopath's just going to say a couple mean things to her.
I'm intrigued to see where he's going to take this character though, because the new one does sound interesting.
Me too. I'm curious too. I'm curious with it being a COVID novel, what he's going to do with that. I'm also a little nervous about it being a COVID novel for the same reasons I'm nervous about it being a Holly novel. I think King with current politics is kind of just, it can go either way.
It could. But Dan, where can our listeners get in touch with you?
Twitter would be a good spot. At DBH Fiction.
All right. And Matt, what about you?
Yeah, well, before I get to my Twitter, some housekeeping for our listeners. You might have noticed last week's episode, we had a little ad for Afflicted from Tonya Robinson. That is something we're helping her out, kind of promote the next season for Afflicted. I did help the first season out. I think it was through Patreon at the time. And it's a great audio drama series that's a little, it's about the Bell Witch. So there's some witch stuff in there, American Horror Story-esque. But anyway, just wanted to say that we'll be running that ad for a little bit because they're doing a new one for season 2. And just to give you the little points of stuff that they would like us to mention. Each episode's about 30 minutes long, and they're aiming for at least 10 episodes this new season coming up, which will actually be premiering a year from now. They're doing this, like I said, all audio drama, and there's audio production to it. So there's all these cool sounds and music and everything like that. So it's like a whole immersive thing. Like if you're listening to, I don't know, I feel like there's other audio drama podcasts out in the world that people listen to. It's like one of those, but it's really cool just to kind of help them out with this one. I know she's been going through some things with Patreon and through the campaign, but they got it all figured out. So definitely go support them. Just listen to the ad. That really helps cover it and everything like that.
Tonya's awesome.
Yeah. So she's super cool. And Afflicted, super awesome. She also runs Nightlight, which we did one of their episodes earlier this year. So if you don't listen to that, you should definitely listen to it. It's all Black horror authors writing horror stories. So definitely check that out. I'm also on Twitter at BrandenburgDM, and you can bug me there.
And also, please mention that he does not look like the Unabomber. Just gonna put that out there. That Matt and the Unabomber are not the same person.
I definitely am not. We might have some interesting things here in Michigan, but I swear I'm not anybody that has a cabin in the woods.
And you can follow me on Twitter with @Rudy53088, and be sure to give Abyss a follow with Added to Staring. And this is Richard Gerlach saying, keep staring.